Every nation on the planet carries debt. The United States now owes more than $38 trillion, the highest amount in its history. The European Union holds about $14 trillion. Japan, nearly $9 trillion. Even countries rich in oil, like Saudi Arabia, or export giants like Germany and China, are deep in the red. But here's the strange part. If everyone owes money, who exactly is it owed to? This is the story of money, power, and history colliding, where debt isn't just an economic concept, but the structure holding the modern world together. Every war, crisis, and recovery rests on this unseen framework of IS. And if you trace those IS far enough, you reach an unsettling truth. The world doesn't owe money to someone else. It owes it to itself. Yet that doesn't mean everyone gains equally. To see how we arrived at this point, a planet burdened with over $315 trillion in total debt, nearly triple the size of the global economy, we have to go back to the beginning. Long before credit cards and online transfers, the idea of national debt was born not in banks, but on battlefields. In 1694, England was at war with France and running out of gold. Desperate, the king turned to merchants for funds. In exchange for a steady stream of interest payments secured by future taxes, they bankrolled the crown. To manage this new system, the Bank of England was founded. It was a radical innovation. The state could now spend money it didn't yet possess. In return, lenders received something invaluable, a government promise, one that could be bought, sold, and traded. That marked the birth of the government bond, the cornerstone of the modern financial world. France imitated it. The Netherlands perfected it. The newly formed United States adopted it to fund its revolution and later its westward expansion. Debt became not a sign of weakness, but a symbol of credibility. The power to borrow became the power to govern. Empires once seized land for gold. Now they issued bonds for interest. The battlefield had shifted to the balance sheet. 3 centuries later, debt has become the world's main export. The US owes $38 trillion, Japan over $9 trillion, and global borrowing grows by about $1 trillion every 100 days. Every nation borrows. Every bank lends. Every citizen through taxes, savings, and pensions is both a borrower and a lender. But who's actually on the other end? Let's start with the United States, because its debt isn't just national, it's global. Of that $38 trillion, roughly half is held by the public, meaning it's owed to investors instead of other branches of government. About 2/3 of those investors are American: banks, mutual funds, pension plans, insurance companies, and the Federal Reserve itself. The remaining third, around $9 trillion, belongs to foreign holders. Japan leads with about $1 trillion, followed by China with roughly $800 billion, then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say the US is indebted to China, that's technically true, but only about 2% of the total. Most of America's debt is owed to itself. The Treasury issues bonds. Financial institutions buy them. The Federal Reserve often purchases them back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes that cover the interest, which then flows into retirement funds and savings accounts. It's a closed loop. The debt is real, but the lender is mostly a reflection of the same system. And this circular design isn't unique to America, it's global. Japan buys us treasuries. The US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe finances developing nations through the World Bank. Developing countries, in turn, invest their reserves in Western bonds. It's a worldwide exchange of promises, a game of hot potato where the potato is made of IS. Every country holds another's debt. Every promise rests on yet another. It's like a poker game where everyone's chips are borrowed from the next player, and the only thing keeping it going is that nobody leaves the table. Behind all this sits a fourth and even stronger layer: the markets themselves. Every government bond connects to a network of institutions: hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks controlling tens of trillions in assets. These are the real judges of credit. They determine who borrows cheaply and who must pay dearly just to stay afloat. When their confidence falters, currencies tumble, governments collapse, and entire economies can be rewritten overnight. Democracy may decide who governs, but markets decide who endures. And at the center of it all sits the modern world's high priest, the central bank. Central banks don't just manage debt, they create it. Each time the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, new money enters existence. The liability on one balance sheet becomes the asset on another. Every dollar in circulation represents a debt somewhere else. Money without debt doesn't exist. Every coin, bill, or digital dollar carries an invisible IOU. For decades, this system has run on faith. As long as investors believe governments will keep paying interest, even if they never pay back the principal, the engine runs smoothly. But when that faith wavers, the gears grind. We've seen it happen. In Greece in 2010, the debt became unpayable. Investors panicked. Interest rates soared. The European Central Bank and the IMF stepped in with loans that came with a heavy price, higher taxes, spending cuts, and mass unemployment. A whole generation learned that bailout often means sacrifice. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national burden. In Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and political unrest followed when the government ran out of foreign currency to service its loans. When the system cracks, creditors suddenly have names: the IMF, rating agencies, and the faceless bondholders who can hold entire nations by the throat. And yet, even after collapse, the pattern restarts. Old debts are restructured, new ones replace them, and the machine powers back on under a new label. Because in today's world, debt isn't meant to be erased, it's meant to be renewed. Governments no longer aim to pay it off. Not now, not ever. That isn't a secret scheme, it's official policy. When individuals borrow, they're expected to repay the principal. Governments, however, treat borrowing like a subscription, constantly issuing new bonds to cover the old, a process economists call refinancing. The real product isn't repayment, but interest, the rent paid for stability. The global economy now depends on that rent. Like a shark that must swim to survive, the system must keep borrowing to stay alive. The modern financial world runs not on repayment, but on confidence. The U.S. will never pay off its $38 trillion debt, it will refinance it indefinitely. Japan has done the same for decades, with debt exceeding 250% of its GDP, yet its bond yields remain near zero. Investors aren't expecting repayment, they're expecting renewal. Why? Because for investors, government debt is the safest asset there is. A U.S. Treasury bond isn't viewed as a burden, it's a cornerstone. Pension funds rely on it. Banks use it as collateral. Central banks treat it as currency. The global economy depends on governments never clearing their debts, because if they did, the world would lose its most dependable financial foundation. Imagine Washington somehow repaid every last dollar. Banks and funds everywhere would lose their most stable holding. The supply of dollars would shrink drastically, triggering deflation and chaos. Paying off the debt would destroy the very mechanism that keeps the economy running. So instead, governments keep issuing more. Not recklessly, but rhythmically. The debt acts like a heartbeat, pulsing through every pension, mortgage, and market on Earth. That's why when politicians promise to balance the budget or pay off the national debt, they're selling a fantasy. The aim isn't to erase debt, but to keep it manageable, attractive, and believable enough that confidence never breaks. Because once belief falters, the math stops mattering, interest rates soar, markets freeze, and the world built on borrowed trust seizes up. That's the hidden truth of sovereign debt. It was never meant to be repaid. The real goal is to keep the world believing it will be. It's a self-contained loop of trust, and as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch endlessly. But trust isn't shared equally. When we say a nation owes it to itself, that's only half the story. Interest payments don't flow evenly. They flow upward from taxpayers and workers to institutions and investors. Debt, then, isn't just a transaction between nations, but a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise hand in hand. The system rewards those who own the debt and burdens those who pay it. The story is the same, only scaled up from households to nations, from nations to the entire world. Creditors aren't villains and debtors aren't victims. They're the two gears of the same machine. The danger begins when the machine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can't keep up with old promises. That's when the question, who's the creditor, stops being abstract and starts being personal. Because at the top of this global pyramid, there isn't one face to blame. It's not China or Wall Street or the IMF. It's all of them and us. Debt itself has become money. Governments issue it, banks multiply it, investors trade it, and ordinary people depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has almost vanished. Debt once meant servitude, now it means balance. But if that balance ever breaks, if confidence disappears, we'll remember what debt truly is: a promise that can't last forever. If this changed how you see it, hit subscribe. History has the clues. Let's follow them together.